Hey, take a closer look at these Jefferson Nickels. 4 different coins, 4 different stories, and details that could completely change how collectors see them. From wartime silver and unusual minting history to condition, rare varieties, and exceptional strikes, each coin has something worth investigating. Let's take a closer look and uncover what serious collectors notice first. First coin. Few American coins tell the story of wartime America as clearly as the 1943 P. Jefferson War Nickel. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary 5-cent piece, but its metal, its unusual mint mark, and the circumstances behind its creation make it one of the most historically significant nickels of the Jefferson series. Struck at the Philadelphia Mint during the height of World War II, this coin was produced with a silver-bearing alloy instead of the traditional copper-nickel mixture, because nickel had become a strategically important material for the war effort. More than 271 million was struck, so this is not a coin that is automatically rare simply because it contains silver. The real story begins when you separate an ordinary circulated example from one with exceptional preservation, sharp detail, an important variety, or an unusual minting characteristic. As we move through the details, we'll examine how collectors distinguish the ordinary from the extraordinary, how authentication can change the picture completely, and what authenticated examples have actually brought at auction. Most importantly, we'll see why the date and the large P alone do not determine the value of this fascinating wartime survivor. The reason this nickel exists goes directly back to the demands of World War II. Before the wartime alloy was introduced, Jefferson nickels were normally made from 75% copper and 25% nickel. But nickel was considered strategically important for military production, so the United States Mint needed another way to manufacture a 5-cent coin without consuming the metal needed elsewhere. The solution was a completely different alloy containing 56% copper, 35% silver, and 9% manganese. That mixture allowed the mint to continue producing a coin with essentially the same physical characteristics while removing nickel from the equation. The wartime version weighed 5 grams, measured about 21.2 millimeters across, and had a plain edge. The change also created something unprecedented in Philadelphia coinage, a large P mint mark placed prominently above Monticello on the reverse. Before this wartime experiment, Philadelphia traditionally produced coins without a mint mark, so the oversized P became an immediate visual signal that the coin belonged to the new silver alloy production. The first wartime nickels were struck at Philadelphia in October 1942, and the silver composition continued through 1945. The 1943 P, therefore, represents not merely a silver-containing nickel, but a physical record of a moment when the mint was adapting everyday American money to the extraordinary material demands of global war. On the obverse, the coin carries Felix Schlag's portrait of Thomas Jefferson facing left, with liberty and the date positioned around the portrait, and in God We Trust along the lower edge. The reverse presents Monticello, Jefferson's Virginia home, beneath the inscriptions United States of America, EPLUBUS UNUM, 5 cents, and MONTICLLO. Yet on this wartime version, the detail that immediately deserves attention is not the building itself, but the oversized P hovering above it. That letter identifies Philadelphia, and in this period, confirms that the coin belongs to the 35% silver wartime alloy. The coin's surface can also provide clues, although appearance alone should never be treated as proof of composition. Fresh examples can display a bright silvery white appearance, while circulated specimens may develop darker or even greenish-looking tunning as the alloy ages. Some pieces show attractive natural tunning, while others may have been exposed to chemicals, harsh cleaning, moisture, or improper storage. That distinction matters because collectors generally prefer original surfaces over artificially altered ones. Unlike copper cents, Jefferson nickels are not normally assigned formal red, red-brown, or brown color designations, so a colorful appearance does not automatically translate into a special grading category. For this coin, the bigger questions are originality, surface quality, strike, luster, preservation, and whether the reverse steps are sufficiently defined to qualify for the coveted full steps designation. Those details can separate a common wartime nickel from a premium quality numismatic example. And this is where the first major surprise appears. The 1943P is historically fascinating, but its basic mintage is not especially low. Philadelphia produced 271,165,000 examples, meaning that large numbers entered circulation during and after the war. That abundance is one reason a normal worn specimen is generally a modestly priced collectible rather than a four-figure rarity. In circulated condition, its value is influenced by the silver content, collector demand, and overall eye appeal, while lightly circulated or attractive examples can command more. Once the coin reaches the upper mint state grades, however, the conversation changes. Collectors begin competing for pieces with clean surfaces, strong luster, minimal contact marks, and especially sharp definition on Monticello. A certified gem can move into the hundreds of dollars, while unusually strong specimens with full steps can move into four-figure territory. For example, a high-quality authenticated example can realistically enter the neighborhood of $1,200 to $2,000 when grade and strike quality justify the premium, but that is very different from saying every 1943P is worth that amount. The distinction is essential. A coin with the same date and mint mark might be worth only a few dollars in circulated condition, while another can bring dramatically more because its preservation places it in a much smaller population of survivors. The 1943P is therefore a perfect demonstration of a basic numismatic principle. Mintage tells you how many were made, but condition tells you how many remain truly desirable at the highest level. The most interesting values emerge when a normal 1943P is compared with its recognized varieties. One of the major varieties is the 1943 2P overdate, where remnants of the underlying 2 can be seen beneath the final digit of the date. This is not simply a coin that happens to have a strange-looking numeral. The attribution must match the established diagnostic characteristics of the variety. The variety has generated serious collector interest, and certified examples have appeared at auction in a wide range of grades. One documented MS-66 example sold for $575, while another MS-66 example brought $690, illustrating how market results can vary even when the numerical grade appears identical. The finest historical auction result listed by PCGS for the 1943 2P variety reached $16,675 for an MS-67 specimen, a figure that belongs to an exceptional high-grade example rather than the ordinary coin. This is precisely why auction records must be handled carefully. A headline number from a famous sale does not establish the value of every example carrying the same date. For a particularly attractive certified overdate, a collector might encounter prices around $1,400 to $2,700 depending on grade, eye appeal, certification, and current demand, while a circulated example of the same variety could be dramatically less. The lesson is to identify the variety first, verify it against authoritative references, and only then evaluate condition and market value. There is another variety that makes the 1943P especially exciting, the famous doubled die obverse, often associated with the distinctive doubled eye. On genuine examples, the doubling can be visible around Jefferson's eye, while additional doubling appears in areas such as Liberty, the date, and in God W.E. Trust. PCGS identifies the 1943P doubled die obverse as one of the major double die varieties of the Jefferson Nickel series, and the strongest examples can be particularly desirable when they also possess full steps. This is an important distinction because not every apparent doubling is valuable. Machine doubling, die deterioration, scratches, polishing, or damage can create shapes that look unusual under magnification but have no recognized numismatic premium. A genuine doubled die is a specific die variety created during the die-making process, and attribution should be based on documented diagnostics rather than simply noticing an extra line. Certified high-grade pieces demonstrate just how far the market can move when rarity and condition intersect. PCGS records an auction result of $9,400 for a 1943P regular strike MS-64 example, while a remarkable MS-68 full steps example reached $14,688. Those results show that authenticated exceptional coins can move well beyond the ordinary collector range. An especially desirable double-die or top-grade full-step specimen can therefore reach approximately $2,500 to $4,000 in a strong market, while extraordinary certified pieces may go considerably higher. Authentication becomes critical once a coin appears valuable enough to justify serious money. The first examination should establish that the physical specifications make sense: approximately 5 grams in weight, about 21.2 millimeters in diameter, the expected silver appearance, and the unmistakable large P above Monticello. A precise scale and caliper can identify obvious inconsistencies, but they cannot by themselves prove authenticity. The surfaces, lettering, date, rim, strike characteristics, and die markers all need to agree with a genuine mint-produced piece. A magnet is also useful as a quick screening tool because silver is not magnetic, but a non-magnetic result does not authenticate a coin. Professional grading services can examine the piece, certify authenticity, assign a numerical grade, and when appropriate, attribute recognized varieties. That certification can make a substantial difference when a coin enters the higher value market. Collectors should also be cautious with coins that have been polished, dipped improperly, scratched, drilled, plated, or chemically altered. Cleaning can destroy original surfaces and sharply reduce desirability even when the underlying coin is genuine. Counterfeits deserve particular attention when an apparent rarity carries a 4-figure price tag, because the greater the potential premium, the greater the incentive for deception. If a 1943P appears to be an unusually valuable double-die, overdate, or extremely high-grade full-step specimen, professional authentication is not an unnecessary expense. It is part of establishing what the coin actually is. Preservation is equally important because the qualities that create a premium today can be damaged surprisingly easily. A collector should avoid touching the faces of the coin with bare fingers, since oils and contaminants can leave residues that eventually affect the surface. The safest approach is to handle it by the edge and keep it in an inert holder designed for long-term coin storage. PVC-containing soft plastics should be avoided because they can leave damaging residues on the metal over time. A stable, dry environment with limited temperature and humidity fluctuations is preferable to a basement, garage, or other location where moisture levels can change dramatically. Cleaning should also be avoided. A coin that looks dull or toned is not automatically dirty, and attempting to make it shine can permanently change the surface and reduce its collector appeal. Full steps deserve particular attention because the steps at the base of Monticello can be interrupted by weak striking or contact marks. A coin can be technically high-grade yet fail to receive the full steps designation because the necessary lines are not complete and sufficiently distinct. This is one reason two coins with similar numerical grades can sell for very different amounts. The market rewards originality, sharpness, clean surfaces, and scarcity within a specific grade. The 1943P also has another important advantage for collectors. Because it belongs to a short wartime series, it fits naturally into specialized collections of silver Jefferson Nickels, Philadelphia issues, full steps examples, and major varieties. Its historical importance gives collectors several reasons to pursue it beyond its silver content alone. Ultimately, the 1943P Jefferson War nickel is valuable because several different stories can exist inside the same date and mint mark. One example may be a well-worn survivor worth only a small premium over its basic collectible or silver-related value. Another may be a sharply preserved mint state coin with attractive original surfaces, while another could be a full steps example, a verified 1943 2P overdate, or a genuine doubled die obverse with the famous doubled eye. The upper end, documented auction results prove that exceptional certified pieces can reach many thousands of dollars. PCGS records $9,400 for an MS-64 regular strike example and $14,688 for an MS-68 full steps example. while the 1943 2p variety has an even higher recorded result of $16,675 for an MS-67. Those numbers should not be mistaken for ordinary market values. They represent specific coins whose grade, attribution, and overall quality place them in exceptional territory. For most collectors, the more realistic goal is identification and preservation rather than assuming a jackpot. Check the large P, study the date carefully, inspect Jefferson's I and the lettering for legitimate doubling, examine Monticello for full steps, and look closely at the surfaces before making any judgment. Most importantly, remember what makes this coin special in the first place. During a global conflict, the United States temporarily transformed a familiar 5-cent piece into a silver-bearing wartime coin and marked it in a way that had never before been used by Philadelphia. Nearly a century later, every genuine 1943 P still carries that story. And when an example combines that history with exceptional preservation, a recognized variety, or an unusually strong strike, its collector value can rise far beyond what its 5-cent denomination ever suggested. Next coin. A 1954 Jefferson nickel can look almost ordinary in a handful of loose change, yet this modest 5-cent coin has become an intriguing target for collectors who understand how dramatically condition, strike quality, varieties, and preservation can change a coin desirability. Its story begins with the familiar portrait of Thomas Jefferson, but the real numismatic interest lies beneath that familiar appearance. Which mint produced it, how sharply the dies struck its details, whether the surfaces remain original, and whether the coin belongs to a scarce grade or recognized variety. Millions were made, so simply finding a 1954 nickel does not mean you have found a rarity. What makes the search interesting is that relatively common coins can become surprisingly difficult to locate in truly exceptional condition, particularly when collectors demand strong luster, clean surfaces, and sharply defined steps on Monticello. Later, we will examine the characteristics that professional graders use to separate ordinary survivors from premium examples, look at documented auction results, and explain why authenticated coins at the highest levels can attract serious competition. The important point is that the date on the coin is only the beginning of the investigation, not the conclusion. By 1954, the Jefferson nickel had already spent more than a decade in American commerce. The series began in 1938 after the United States Mint replaced the Buffalo nickel, and Felix Schlag's portrait of Thomas Jefferson became the defining image of the new 5-cent piece. The early 1950s were a period of transition for the United States economy. World War II had ended less than a decade earlier, the Korean War had recently concluded, and the country was moving through a post-war environment marked by industrial expansion, changing consumer habits, and relatively modest inflation compared with later decades. The nickel remained an everyday denomination, used for purchases ranging from newspapers and candy to transportation and vending machines. Unlike the special wartime nickels struck from a silver-bearing alloy from 1942 through 1945, the regular 1954 issue returned to the traditional copper-nickel composition of 75% copper and 25% nickel. That alloy gave the coin its familiar pale appearance and durability in circulation. The standard piece weighed 5 grams, measured approximately 21.2 millimeters in diameter, and had a plain edge. These specifications were not chosen merely for appearance. Maintaining the established physical characteristics allowed the coin to function normally in vending equipment and commerce, while preserving the familiar 5-cent denomination. The 1954 nickel, therefore, represents a more stable chapter of the Jefferson series, produced after the extraordinary wartime experiment had ended and American coinage had returned to its conventional metallic composition. The date becomes more interesting when the mint mark is considered. Jefferson nickels dated 1954 were produced at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and each facility contributed a different chapter to the year's production. Philadelphia struck coins without a mint mark, while Denver carried a D and San Francisco carried an S on the reverse, to the right of Monticello. The combined production was substantial, but the individual mintages were not identical. That difference has consequences for collectors. The Philadelphia issue had a mintage of 47,684,050, Denver produced 47,684,000, and San Francisco struck 47,663,000. Those numbers might initially suggest that all three are essentially equally common, and in terms of original production, they are relatively close. But mintage is only the first measurement of rarity. Millions of coins disappeared into circulation, were lost, damaged, cleaned, or simply neglected, while a much smaller number survived with the kind of pristine surfaces and powerful strikes demanded by advanced collectors. San Francisco issues from this era can be especially interesting because strike quality varies, and the steps of Monticello can be difficult to preserve with full definition. The mint mark itself is therefore an important identification tool, but it does not automatically determine value. A sharply struck example from a high mintage issue can sometimes be more desirable than a weaker coin from a similar or slightly lower mintage, because the population of coins surviving in top condition is what ultimately creates the premium. The artistry of the Jefferson nickel also deserves closer attention because the coin is essentially a miniature architectural and historical portrait. Schlag's obverse presents Jefferson facing left, with liberty and the date surrounding the portrait and the motto "In God We Trust" along the lower portion. The reverse places Monticello, Jefferson's estate in Virginia, at the center of the design, accompanied by United States of America, EPLUBUSUNUM, 5 cents, and MONTICLLO. The choice of Monticello was particularly appropriate because the building represented Jefferson's architectural interests, intellectual life, and personal connection to the early republic. Yet the reverse also introduced one of the most important technical challenges for collectors: the steps beneath Monticello. During striking, the pressure of the dies, the condition of the dies themselves, and the alignment of the planchet can influence how clearly those horizontal lines appear. Contact with other coins during production and circulation can then destroy the delicate definition. For advanced Jefferson nickel collectors, fully separated and sharply visible steps can make an otherwise attractive coin substantially more desirable. Unlike copper Lincoln cents, Jefferson nickels are not normally assigned the familiar red, red-brown, or brown color designations. Instead, collectors pay much closer attention to the originality of the surfaces, the quality of the nickel luster, tunning, contact marks, strike strength, and eye appeal. A natural golden, champagne, gray, or other subtle tunning pattern may be perfectly acceptable, while artificial coloring or harsh cleaning can damage the coin's market appeal even if the underlying metal remains intact. Once condition enters the discussion, the ordinary 1954 nickel begins to separate from the coins that command serious collector premiums. A heavily circulated piece may be an inexpensive addition to a date-and mint collection, while an attractive uncirculated coin can be considerably more desirable. Professional grading services generally evaluate coins on a numerical scale from circulated grades through mint state levels, with higher grades reflecting fewer imperfections and stronger overall preservation. But grade alone does not tell the entire story. Two coins carrying the same numerical grade can perform very differently in the marketplace if one has better luster, cleaner fields, stronger detail, or superior eye appeal. On a Jefferson nickel, the reverse steps are particularly important because a high numerical grade without fully defined steps may not satisfy collectors pursuing full steps examples. At the upper end of the market, the population of surviving coins becomes increasingly important. If thousands of examples exist in lower grades, but only a handful are certified at a much higher level, competition can become intense. That is where values can move into four-figure territory. A genuinely exceptional, authenticated 1954 Jefferson nickel might bring something in the neighborhood of $1,100 to $1,800 when its grade, strike, surfaces, and collector demand justify the premium. That figure should never be applied to every 1954 nickel. Most examples are nowhere near that level. The premium belongs to the specific qualities that make the individual coin scarce, and those qualities have to survive close professional examination. Varieties and errors add another layer, but this is an area where caution is essential. The 1954 Jefferson nickel is not automatically a major rarity simply because someone notices doubling, unusual lettering, a strange rim, or an irregular mark. Genuine die varieties result from identifiable characteristics associated with the production of the dies, while many apparent anomalies on circulated coins are simply damage, die wear, machine doubling, scratches, dents, or post-mint alterations. Collectors should therefore compare suspected varieties with established numismatic references rather than relying on photographs from social media or a magnified image that merely looks unusual. The same principle applies to errors. A legitimate mint error must have a recognizable production mechanism and characteristics consistent with an error occurring at the United States Mint. If a 1954 nickel appears to have an off-center strike, clipped planchet, dramatic die break, broad strike, or another unusual feature, authentication becomes especially important before assigning a premium. Some error coins can command substantial prices because they are both genuine and scarce, but rarity must be demonstrated rather than assumed. In exceptional circumstances, an authenticated variety, dramatic error, or top population condition rarity could push a 1954 nickel toward roughly $2,300 to $3,700, depending on the exact attribution and market conditions. Such figures describe specialized pieces, not ordinary coins pulled from circulation. This distinction protects collectors from one of the most common mistakes in modern coin hunting, confusing something unusual-looking with something genuinely rare. Authentication is particularly important when the apparent value rises sharply. A genuine 1954 nickel should conform to the expected dimensions, weight, design, metal characteristics, and manufacturing details of the issue. A precision scale can confirm whether the coin is close to the expected 5-gram specification, while diameter and thickness measurements can provide additional evidence, but home measurements cannot establish authenticity by themselves. A magnet can be used as a basic screening tool because the normal copper-nickel alloy is not attracted like ordinary ferromagnetic steel, yet a non-magnetic result proves very little. Counterfeiters can reproduce the general appearance of a Jefferson nickel surprisingly well, so serious candidates should be examined for incorrect lettering, unnatural surfaces, casting characteristics, altered mint marks, suspicious seams, incorrect weight, and inconsistencies in the design. Certification by a respected professional grading service provides another layer of confidence because the coin is examined, authenticated, encapsulated, and assigned a grade according to established standards. Collectors should also be careful with coins advertised using unsupported claims such as rare error, unknown variety, or guaranteed valuable. A legitimate rarity should have evidence behind it. If the coin has been polished, aggressively cleaned, chemically treated, or otherwise altered, its appearance may become less attractive to experienced collectors even though the coin remains genuine. The objective is not to make an old nickel look new. It is to preserve the original evidence of its journey through the mint, circulation, and decades of storage. That journey is ultimately what makes the 1954 Jefferson nickel so enduring as a collectible. The vast majority were ordinary pieces of American commerce, changing hands countless times and gradually accumulating the marks of everyday life. A much smaller group escaped that process and remained bright, sharply struck, and remarkably well preserved. Those survivors are what advanced collectors compete for today, especially when strong luster, clean fields, attractive surfaces, and complete Monticello steps come together in one coin. Documented auction records demonstrate that exceptional Jefferson nickels can bring substantial premiums, but responsible collecting requires separating verified results from exaggerated online claims. A four-figure result belongs to a particular authenticated coin with particular characteristics. It does not establish the value of every 1954 nickel. For an ordinary collector examining one today, the most useful approach is systematic. Identify the mint, inspect the surfaces under good lighting. Evaluate the strike, study Monticello's steps, look for recognized varieties rather than random imperfections, and consider professional certification when the evidence suggests a genuinely important piece. Long-term preservation matters just as much. Store the coin in an inert holder, avoid PVC materials, keep it away from excessive humidity and temperature changes, and never attempt to polish away natural tunning or surface marks. The 1954 Jefferson nickel may have been created as a simple 5-cent coin, but its surviving examples now tell a more complicated story, one shaped by American history, mint technology, circulation, preservation, rarity, and collector competition. Its true significance is not found simply in the portrait of Jefferson or the number stamped beside it, but in the remarkable difference between an ordinary survivor and an authenticated example, whose condition and characteristics place it among the finest representatives of its kind. Next up, at first glance, the 1964 D. Jefferson nickel looks like exactly what its denomination promises, an ordinary 5-cent coin that could have passed through countless American hands without anyone giving it a second thought. But place one under proper lighting, turn it slowly, and start examining the details the way an experienced numismatist would, and the picture becomes much more interesting. The date, the small d mint mark, the quality of Jefferson's portrait, the surfaces around the lettering, and especially the details of Monticello can tell a much deeper story than the coin's humble appearance suggests. This particular issue was produced during one of the most unusual periods in modern United States coinage, when the mint was struggling to satisfy enormous demand for circulating coins. Millions were struck, yet truly exceptional survivors can be much harder to locate than the original production number suggests. That difference between how many coins were made and how many remain desirable at the highest grades is where the investigation begins. As we examine this nickel together, we'll uncover why collectors pay close attention to details most people overlook, how authenticity and condition affect the market, and why certain certified examples have achieved impressive collector values while ordinary circulated pieces remain comparatively accessible. To understand the 1964 D, you first have to understand what was happening around it. The early 1960s brought rapid economic and social change to the United States, and by 1964, the country was experiencing strong demand for circulating coinage. The United States Mint was producing enormous quantities of coins as the economy expanded and the public continued using cash for everyday purchases. At the same time, the nation was dealing with a growing coin shortage that would become increasingly severe during the mid-1960s. Silver prices were rising, people were saving certain silver coins rather than spending them, and the mint was searching for ways to keep enough coins in circulation. The Jefferson nickel was especially important because its composition did not depend on silver. The regular nickel remained a 5-gram copper-nickel coin, composed of 75% copper and 25% nickel, allowing the mint to continue producing the denomination without the silver alloy changes that affected dimes, quarters, and half dollars. The 1964 D was struck at the Denver Mint, identified by the small d beneath the date on the obverse. Its enormous production was part of the mint's response to demand, and that extraordinary output is one of the most important clues to understanding the coin today. The Denver Mint struck 1,787,297,160 Jefferson Nickels dated 1964, an astonishing figure that immediately tells us this is not a rarity based simply on mintage. Instead, the collector's investigation has to move towards survival, preservation, strike quality, and the scarcity of coins that remain exceptional after more than 6 decades. Now look closely at the physical coin itself, because the specifications establish the baseline against which an authentic example can be judged. A normal 1964 D. Jefferson nickel weighs 5 grams and measures approximately 21.2 millimeters in diameter, with a plain edge rather than the reeded edge found on many other U.S. denominations. Its copper-nickel alloy gives the coin a hard, silvery appearance when freshly struck, but decades of circulation can dramatically change that appearance. On the obverse is Felix Schlagg's portrait of Thomas Jefferson, facing left, with Liberty and the date positioned around the portrait and In God We Trust along the lower edge. The reverse presents Monticello, Jefferson's Virginia estate, with United States of America and EPLUBUSUNUM above, and 5 cents and MONTICLLO below. The design was intended to connect the nation's 5-cent coin with Jefferson's role in American history, while Monticello provided a distinctive architectural centerpiece that could be recognized even at small size. When you examine a 1964D, experienced collectors do not simply ask whether the portrait is present, they inspect the quality of the strike. Look at Jefferson's hair, cheek, jawline, and the lettering. Then turn to the reverse and study Monticello, especially the horizontal steps at the building's base. Weakly struck steps can limit the desirability of an otherwise high-grade coin, while exceptionally sharp definition can make the piece much more competitive among advanced Jefferson nickel collectors. The difference may be subtle to an inexperienced eye, but it can be significant in the marketplace. The next question is what happened to these coins after they left Denver. Unlike a commemorative or proof coin intended primarily for collectors, the 1964D Jefferson nickel was a circulating workhorse. Freshly struck pieces entered banks, businesses, vending machines, cash registers, and pockets across the country. Every transaction exposed the surfaces to additional contact, and the raised areas of the design naturally received the most wear. Jefferson's cheek, hair, jawline, and the highest portions of the reverse design can show friction long before the coin appears dramatically worn to a casual observer. The fields can collect small abrasions from contact with other coins, while the rims may develop marks from bags and bulk handling at the mint. This history explains why original mint luster is so important today. A coin can be technically uncirculated, but still have numerous contact marks that reduce its eye appeal. Another may have fewer distractions and stronger luster, making it more desirable even within a similar grade range. Professional grading attempts to evaluate these differences systematically. Circulated pieces may fall into grades such as very fine or extremely fine, while uncirculated examples are assigned mint state grades beginning at MS60 and extending upward as preservation improves. There is no special red, red-brown, or brown color classification system for Jefferson nickels like the one commonly used for copper Lincoln cents. Instead, collectors focus on original surfaces, natural tunning, luster, strike, contact marks, and overall appearance. A naturally toned nickel can be attractive, but artificial coloring, polishing, or harsh chemical treatment can reduce its desirability. Once you understand these distinctions, the enormous original mintage becomes less intimidating. The real scarcity lies in finding the right quality among the surviving population. This is where a collector examining a 1964D should slow down rather than immediately search for a price. Start with the date and confirm that the final digit is genuine and undistorted. Move to the D-mint mark and inspect its shape, placement, and surrounding surface for evidence of alteration. Then examine the lettering, because unusual-looking letters can sometimes result from die characteristics, damage, or mechanical doubling rather than a valuable variety. On the reverse, study Monticello under magnification and look carefully at the steps. Advanced collectors may pursue full steps examples where the relevant horizontal lines are sufficiently complete and sharply defined to qualify under the grading service's criteria. But this is also an area where photographs can be deceptive. Lighting can create the illusion of complete steps, while small contact marks can disappear in a low-resolution image. A genuinely strong strike has to withstand close inspection. Varieties and errors should receive the same level of caution. The 1964D is known for collectible die varieties, including double die and repunchment mark interests documented by specialists, but a random extra line or distorted digit should never automatically be called an error. Machine doubling, die wear, scratches, dents, and postmint damage can imitate some of the visual characteristics collectors are looking for. Genuine mint errors, when they occur, have to be explained by an actual production event and supported by diagnostics. If a coin appears to have an off-center strike, clipped planchet, die break, broad strike, or another dramatic mint-made anomaly, authentication is especially important before assigning a premium. The most valuable lesson here is simple. Magnification helps you discover evidence, but references and professional attribution help you understand what that evidence actually means. Once a 1964D begins to look unusually strong, the market can become much more interesting. An ordinary circulated nickel may have limited numismatic value beyond its role as a collectible date and mint example, while a well-preserved mint state coin can attract considerably more attention. At the upper end, collectors are not merely buying a date, they are competing for scarcity within a specific grade. 1964D that has clean fields, strong original luster, minimal contact marks, excellent eye appeal, and exceptional reverse definition can command a premium that has little connection to its 5-cent face value. For a genuinely impressive certified specimen, a realistic collector-level figure might fall around $1,250 to $1,900, depending heavily on grade, full steps status, certification, and current demand. A different coin with the same date and mint mark could be worth dramatically less if it has been circulated, cleaned, heavily marked, or weakly struck. This is why evaluation cannot responsibly be made from the date alone. At even higher levels, population reports become important because collectors want to know how many comparable coins have been certified at or above a particular grade. If only a small number occupy the uppermost levels, competition can increase sharply. A coin with the same numerical grade can also bring different prices at different auctions because bidders respond to eye appeal, registry set demand, provenance, market timing, and the specific quality of the individual piece. A documented auction result should therefore be treated as evidence about one coin's market performance, not as a promise about another coin sitting in someone's collection. Authentication becomes increasingly important as the potential premium rises. A collector can begin with basic physical checks, confirm the expected weight, diameter, plain edge, copper-nickel appearance, correct design, and genuine-looking D-mint mark. But these checks are only preliminary. Counterfeiters can produce convincing replicas, while altered coins can sometimes be made by manipulating dates, mint marks, surfaces, or design features. Pay attention to unnatural texture, casting-like surfaces, seams, incorrect lettering, suspiciously soft details, inconsistent color, or a mint mark that appears different from the surrounding design in a way that suggests alteration. A scale is useful, but a correct weight does not prove authenticity because a counterfeit can be manufactured to the proper specifications. The same is true of visual comparison. The strongest approach for an important candidate is professional examination by a recognized grading and authentication service. Certification can establish authenticity, document the grade, and where applicable, identify a recognized variety or special designation. It also gives buyers and sellers a standardized description when a coin enters the marketplace. Preservation should begin before that stage. Never polish a potentially valuable Jefferson nickel simply because its surface looks dull. Avoid abrasive cloths, household cleaners, acids, and improvised chemical treatments. Store the coin in an inert holder that does not contain harmful PVC and keep it in a stable environment away from excessive humidity, heat, and rapid temperature changes. Handle it by the edge whenever possible. These practices may sound simple, but protecting original surfaces is one of the easiest ways to preserve the qualities that collectors ultimately pay premiums to own. The deeper significance of the 1964D Jefferson nickel becomes clear when you place its huge production against the tiny number of coins that can satisfy the most demanding collectors. More than 1.7 billion was struck at Denver, yet the modern market does not treat all of those pieces as interchangeable. Circulated examples tell the story of everyday American commerce, while high-grade survivors preserve the appearance of a coin much closer to the moment it left the mint. Exceptional strike quality, original luster, clean surfaces, full steps, recognized varieties, and genuine mint errors can each create separate levels of collector interest. Four-figure prices can occur for particularly desirable certified pieces, with an exceptional example potentially reaching approximately $2,600 to $3,900 when rarity, grade, originality, and demand all align. But extraordinary numbers must always be connected to the exact coin that earned them. A spectacular auction result for a rare, authenticated, high-grade, or important era example should never be interpreted as the normal value of every 1964D nickel. That distinction is central to responsible numismatics. The coin's long-term collectability comes from its place in the Jefferson series, its connection to the massive coin production demands of 1964, and the challenge of locating survivors with genuinely exceptional preservation. So when you hold a 1964D Jefferson nickel, resist the temptation to judge it in a few seconds. Read the date, locate the D, study Jefferson's portrait, examine the lettering, follow the original luster across the fields, inspect the surfaces for contact marks, and then turn the coin over and let Monticello answer the most important question of all. How well was this particular piece actually struck and preserved? That investigation, not the denomination printed on the coin, is what determines whether an ordinary 5-cent piece remains ordinary or becomes a serious object of numismatic interest. Last coin. The 1988D Jefferson nickel is the kind of coin that can disappear into a collection without attracting much attention, because hundreds of millions were made and examples can still be encountered without much difficulty. Yet place one beneath a bright lamp and examine it the way a serious numismatist would, and an entirely different question emerges. How many of those hundreds of millions were struck sharply enough, preserved carefully enough, and fortunate enough to survive without the marks that normally accumulate on a circulating nickel? That distinction is the reason this particular Denver issue continues to attract specialists. The coin itself is not made from precious metal. It is the familiar 75% copper, 25% nickel alloy used for regular Jefferson nickels, and its face value is only 5 cents. The intrigue comes from the gap between abundance and exceptional quality. A collector is not simply asking whether a 1988D exists, but whether this particular example possesses the combination of original luster, clean surfaces, strong design detail, and especially sharp Monticello steps that can make an otherwise common issue surprisingly difficult at the highest levels. Later in this investigation, we will examine exactly what separates an ordinary survivor from a desirable certified specimen, how full steps can change the equation, and what documented market results reveal about the strongest examples. The important clue is already sitting in front of us. Rarity does not always begin with how few coins were minted. Sometimes it begins with how few were preserved exceptionally well. To understand why the 1988D exists in such enormous numbers, we have to step into the America of the late 1980s. The country was in the final years of the Reagan era. The economy had expanded significantly during the decade, consumer spending was strong, and the United States was still operating in a monetary environment where coins were essential tools of everyday commerce. A nickel in 1988 was not a collector's object waiting to be discovered. It was working money. It moved through cash registers, vending machines, banks, restaurants, stores, and pockets, often alongside pennies, dimes, and quarters. The Denver Mint was one of the principal facilities producing these circulating coins, and the small d beneath the date identifies this particular issue as a Denver product. Its reported mintage was 663,771,652 pieces, a number large enough to establish that the 1988D is not a conventional rarity based on production alone. Yet that enormous output also helps explain an unusual collecting phenomenon. When a date is common, collectors can become even more selective about quality. There is little reason to pay a major premium for an average example when so many alternatives exist. The competition shifts toward the coins that stand apart, those with superior preservation, unusually strong strikes, attractive surfaces, or recognized special characteristics. That is the economic logic behind modern condition rarity. The Mint may have created hundreds of millions of identical 5-cent pieces, but the marketplace eventually sorts them into very different categories according to what happened to each coin after it was struck. Now the investigation moves from history to the physical evidence. The 1988 Jefferson Nickel follows the standard specifications of the series. It weighs 5 grams, measures 21.2 millimeters across, and has a plain edge. Its copper-nickel alloy gives it the familiar silvery appearance associated with modern nickels, but under magnification, the surface can reveal an enormous amount about how the coin was made and handled. The obverse features Felix Schlag's classic portrait of Thomas Jefferson facing left, with liberty and the date surrounding the portrait and "In God We Trust" along the lower portion. Flip the coin over and Monticello dominates the reverse, accompanied by United States of America, EPLUBUSUNUM, 5 cents, and MONTICLLO. The design is more than decoration. Jefferson's portrait connects the denomination with one of the architects of the American Republic, while Monticello represents his Virginia home and his interests in architecture and intellectual life. But for the collector, Monticello has another significance. The horizontal lines at the base of the building are among the most closely examined details on a Jefferson nickel because the clarity of those steps can reveal the quality of the strike. The coin begins as a blank planchet, receives its design between dies under enormous pressure, and leaves the press with fresh mint luster flowing across its fields. If the dies, planchet, striking pressure, and alignment cooperate, the result can be remarkably crisp. If they do not, the same date can emerge with weakness in important areas. That is why two coins that look identical from several feet away can become completely different propositions once an experienced collector studies them at magnification. The next thing to investigate is what happened to that original surface after the coin left Denver. A freshly struck nickel possesses a characteristic cartwheel-like luster created by the movement of metal across the die during striking. With circulation, that luster gradually changes as the highest points of the design experience friction and the fields collect contact marks. On Jefferson's portrait, collectors often watch the cheek, jaw, hair, and other raised areas for signs of wear. On the reverse, they examine Monticello and the surrounding fields for abrasions, dullness, and interruptions in the original texture. Even coins that were never heavily circulated could receive marks before reaching a collector because newly struck nickels were handled in bulk, transporting in bags, and mixed together during distribution. This is one reason mint state does not mean flawless. A coin graded MS-60 can be technically uncirculated while showing considerable contact evidence, whereas a coin in a much higher mint state grade must display a substantially stronger combination of preservation and eye appeal. Professional grading evaluates factors such as surface marks, strike, luster, and overall condition, but advanced Jefferson nickel collectors often go one step further by looking for the full steps designation. Full steps refers to unusually complete definition on the steps beneath Monticello, and coins that qualify can be dramatically scarcer than their ordinary counterparts at the highest grades. There are no red, red-brown, or brown color designations for Jefferson nickels in the way collectors use those categories for copper cents. Instead, natural tunning, original surface quality, luster, and color appeal are considered as part of the coin's overall appearance. A soft golden or gray tone may be completely natural, while a suspiciously bright surface or evidence of cleaning can be a warning that the coin's appearance has been altered. The collector's objective is therefore not to find the shiniest nickel, but the most original and technically impressive one. This is the moment when a common 1988 D starts to reveal its hidden hierarchy. Suppose you have 10 examples on a table. They all carry the same date and D mint mark, and all are genuine. One may have dull surfaces and obvious circulation wear. Another may appear uncirculated but show a scattering of contact marks. A third might possess attractive luster but suffer from a weak strike. Then perhaps one example begins to separate itself. The fields are remarkably clean, the luster remains vibrant, Jefferson's portrait is sharply defined, and the steps of Monticello appear unusually complete. That last coin is the one an advanced collector stops to examine. PCGS specifically notes that while 1988 D nickels are readily available in ordinary condition, examples at MS-65 and above require substantial searching, with MS-66 full steps described as extremely difficult to locate and MS-67 full steps as exceptionally scarce. This is a textbook example of condition rarity. The mintage is huge, but the number of coins that satisfy the demands of the highest grade market is much smaller. And that scarcity has been reflected in documented sales. PCGS records a $1,610 auction result for a regular strike MS66 1988D, achieved in 2006. That does not mean an ordinary MS66 nickel automatically sells for that amount today, and it certainly does not mean every 1988D is worth four figures. It means a specific certified coin reached that result under the conditions of that sale. Market value can change with time, venue, certification, buyer interest, and the precise quality of the coin. A particularly attractive certified example might fall into a collector range around $1,300 to $1,900 when its grade and surfaces justify serious competition, but the ordinary coin remains far below that level. The entire premium comes from the scarcity of the desirable characteristics, not from the date alone. The reverse is where the investigation can become especially demanding. Under magnification, study the steps beneath Monticello rather than simply glancing at the building. Are the horizontal lines clearly separated? Do contact marks interrupt them? Is there a weak area where the metal failed to flow completely into the die? These details matter because full steps is not a casual description for a coin that merely looks sharp. Professional attribution has specific requirements, and the coin must be in mint state to receive the designation. The 1988D is particularly interesting because high-grade full steps pieces are much scarcer than the enormous mintage would suggest. PCGS's specialist commentary indicates that fewer than 100 examples were known in MS66 full steps, and that MS67 full steps examples were down to fewer than a handful at the time of that assessment. The market has recognized this scarcity dramatically. PCGS records a $3,500 auction result for an MS67 full steps 1988D in March 2019. Again, this is an important distinction. That result belongs to an authenticated, certified, exceptionally preserved coin carrying the full steps designation. It is not a normal value for a 1988D nickel pulled from circulation. If a collector were evaluating another high-quality example today, a range around $2,100 to $3,600 might be conceivable for a genuinely exceptional certified full-step specimen, but the exact result would depend on grade, population, eye appeal, market timing, and buyer competition. There is no responsible way to assign that range to an uncertified coin merely because the steps look promising in a photograph. This is also where collector psychology becomes fascinating. Once a series becomes specialized, people stop competing for coins that are merely available and start competing for coins that are difficult to replace. A registry set collector, for example, may care enormously about a tiny difference in grade or full steps quality that would mean almost nothing to someone spending the coin at a grocery store. But before calling any unusual 1988D a rarity, the evidence has to survive authentication. Start with the basics. Verify the date, confirm the D-mint mark, check the 5-gram standard weight, examine the 21.2mm diameter, and inspect the plain edge. None of these tests proves authenticity individually, but together they can expose obvious inconsistencies. Scale can detect a coin that is significantly too light or heavy, while careful magnification can reveal suspicious lettering, unnatural texture, altered surfaces, or an incorrectly positioned mint mark. Counterfeiters sometimes focus on valuable dates and high-grade appearances, but an altered ordinary coin can also be manipulated to imitate a desirable variety. Be particularly cautious when an apparent doubled feature appears only as a thin secondary line or shelf-like distortion. Mechanical doubling and damage can look impressive under magnification without representing a recognized doubled die. The same caution applies to supposed mint errors. A dramatic off-center strike, clipped planchet, broad strike, die break, or other mint-made error can be collectible, but it must show characteristics consistent with an actual mint production event. No specific major 1988D error should be declared valuable merely because an online listing makes the claim. When the potential value becomes significant, professional authentication and grading provide a far stronger foundation. Certification can confirm the coin is genuine, assign a standardized grade, and when applicable, recognize a full steps designation or documented variety. Preservation begins immediately after that. Never polish the coin, scrape its surfaces, dip it in household chemicals, or attempt to make the nickel look newer. Store it in an inert holder, avoid PVC-containing materials, keep humidity reasonably stable, and handle the piece by its edge rather than touching the surfaces. The objective is to preserve the original evidence that collectors are actually paying to own. The 1988 Jefferson Nickel ultimately demonstrates one of the most important principles in modern numismatics. A huge mintage does not prevent a coin from becoming rare in a particular grade. More than 663 million were struck at Denver, yet the marketplace can treat a circulated example, an ordinary mint state coin, a superb gem, and a top-level full-step specimen as four very different collectibles. That difference explains why long-term collectors continue searching through rolls, old accumulations, and inherited collections even for relatively recent dates. The historical importance of the 1988 D is quieter than that of a wartime nickel or an early Jefferson issue, but it preserves a snapshot of American coin production during the late 20th century, when the familiar 5-cent piece remained an essential part of everyday commerce. Its collector importance comes from the challenge of locating exceptional survivors rather than from precious metal content or a tiny original mintage. The documented market evidence gives us a useful range. A regular MS-66 has reached $1,610 at auction, while an MS-67 full steps example reached $3,500, and those results show precisely how strongly certification, grade, strike quality, and scarcity can reshape the market. Neither result should be mistaken for a guarantee, and neither establishes the value of every 1988 D nickel. A coin potentially approaching the upper end of the market should be authenticated, professionally graded, and evaluated against current population and auction information rather than internet speculation. For the collector holding one today, the investigation is remarkably simple to begin. Read the date, find the D, examine Jefferson's portrait, study the lettering, rotate the coin under controlled light, watch how the original luster moves across the fields, inspect every contact mark, and then spend extra time with the steps beneath Monticello. If the coin is unusually sharp and exceptionally clean, that is when the deeper research begins. And that is the enduring appeal of the 1988 D. An issue made in enormous numbers can still contain a small population of survivors that collectors have spent decades trying to find. Sometimes the most interesting rarity is hiding in plain sight.